So in the last video, I looked at factoring by grouping when a was not 1. Now we're going to do the easier case, when a is 1. So the a value is still referring to the ax squared plus bx plus c. So looking at our quadratic, it just means that this first term is automatically 1. So I'm going to show how to solve it using the grouping method, but I'll also point out the shortcut because it's good to recognize these patterns that will always be true. So for the first question we're going to look at, so number 1 here, we're going to do x squared minus 4x minus 12. And we're going to begin it the same way we did the last set. Our job is to find two numbers that multiply to get to a times c and sum to get us b. So remember that this is a, this is b, this is c. Remember that b is the entirety of the negative 4, and c is the entirety of the negative 12. So when we're looking for a times c, remember that a is just 1. So I'm really looking at 1 times negative 12, so negative 12. And I want to get two numbers that multiply to get me negative 12, but sum to get me negative 4. So let's do our breakdown. I'm considering 1 and 12. That gap is way more than 4. It won't work. I look at 2 and 6. Okay, 2 and 6 has a gap of 4. Now the question is, which one's positive, which one's negative? Well, if I do positive 2 minus 6, I'll get negative 4. If I did negative 2 plus 6, I would get positive 4. So I must do the one where the 6 is negative. Because again, 2 minus 6 gets me that negative 4. So this is the one that I'm going to use. So right now, I'm going to go ahead and show it the long way using grouping, and then afterwards I'll point out the shortcut. So I'm going to have x squared, and then at the end here, let me drop down that minus 12. Inside here, I have plus 2x minus 6x. So as before, these coefficients are the numbers we found right here. And now we're going to go ahead and factor by grouping. First two terms, last two terms. So in these first two terms, what they have in common is just the x. So I start with x, and I have my parentheses. I basically come through and I say divide those first two terms by x. Well, x squared divided by x is just x. 2x divided by x is just 2. So x plus 2. Do the same thing for the second set here. I have negative 6x minus 12. They both have a negative 6 in common. Again, I'm looking for that greatest common factor. So divide by negative 6. And what we're left with, well, negative 6x divided by negative 6 is just x. Negative 12 divided by negative 6 is just plus 2. And again, that's a good thing because I do need these things to match. I need this and this to be the same if I am using factoring by grouping. Okay, so that stuff that we had in common, let's go ahead and take it out. I have x plus 2. And then the rest of it is what I had left over. X minus 6. X minus 6. And let me actually make that look like a better plus sign. Okay, so that is our final answer. That is the long way, factoring by grouping. But remember, there was a shortcut. This 2 and that negative 6 will be that 2 and that negative 6 every single time. Whatever number you see, these two separate numbers, they will be the factors. But this is only true when a is 1. So it's a shortcut you are totally allowed to use as long as a is 1. And you're welcome to do the long way, because again, that long method is the same thing you'll use even when a is not 1. Let's go ahead and repeat this process for another question. Go ahead and take a look at question 2 here. I've got x squared plus 9x plus 20. Okay. And as before, I'm going to go and label my A, B, and C. So A, B, and C. And something I should point out is that A, B, and C are the numbers. So remember, A is the 1 here. Back up top here, A was the 1 sitting here. The A is not the x squared, it's the 1 in front of the x squared. So coming over to here, AC is 1 times 20, so 20. I need two numbers to multiply to get me 20 and sum to get me 9. Well, that's 4 and 5. Because 4 times 5 is 20, and when I add them up, 4 plus 5 equals 9. So I know I'm going to be using that. And again, I'll show it using the grouping method and also point out the shortcut. Well, again, the shortcut is these two numbers here, they're going to have to be what I get. I will have to get out x plus 4, x plus 5. But again, I'll prove it to you using factoring by grouping. So that x squared and that plus 20. And then from here, I'm going to have plus 4x plus 5x. And now I'll go ahead and do that factoring by grouping. In these first two terms, they both have an x in common. So I'm going to divide the first two by x. What I am left with is x plus 4. Because x squared divided by x is x, 4x divided by x is 4. In the next set, I have 5x plus 20. They both have a 5 in common. So I'm going to take out that 5 by division. And again, I am left with x plus 4. Okay? And then, as we had hoped, the insides are both x plus 4, which means, as I predicted, what I get out is x plus 4 times the quantity of x plus 5, stuff in the front. So things to pay attention to, just like I mentioned in the previous video when A was not 1, when I'm using grouping, whenever I'm using grouping, don't forget that there is a plus sign sitting here. There's a plus sign here, there was a minus sign sitting there. Things are being separated. And it's only in the final step where it's now being multiplied, because when I am factoring, it's the reverse of distribution, and that's why it's now being multiplied here. Question here. This time I have x squared plus 5x minus 24. Let's go ahead and start. I've got 1, which is my a value, 5 is my b, negative 24 is my c. AC is 1 times negative 24, so just negative 24. And I'm looking for two values that multiply to get me negative 24 and sum to get me 5. Go and work my way up. Let's try 1 and 24. That definitely won't get us 5. Try 2 and 12. Definitely won't get us 5. Try 3 and 8. Okay, 3 and 8 have a gap of 5. Now the question is, which one is positive, which one's negative? Well, if I make this be a negative 3, negative 3 plus 8 will get me 5. So use that negative sign, and that's because negative 3 plus 8 equals 5. So this is the one I'm going to have to use. Let's go ahead and fill it in. So x squared, and that minus 24. And on the inside, I'm going to have negative 3x plus 8x. Now again, based on our shortcut, we already know that the factoring at the very end will use negative 3 and 8. But I'm still proving it using grouping so you understand where the stuff is coming from. It also gives you another method you can use to solve these. There we go. So from this first set here, let's go ahead and take out an x. So these are divisible by x. X squared divided by, actually let me close parentheses here. X squared divided by x is just x. Negative 3x divided by x is my minus 3. If I look at the next side over here, both of these parts are divisible by 8. So plus 8, drop that down. 8x divided by 8 is x. negative 24 divided by 8 is minus 3. And it has to be. If it's not this, that means I can't use factoring by grouping, as I mentioned before. If you can't use factoring by grouping, you might need to use something else like rational root theorem or quadratic formula. Something else will have to happen. But for these questions here, you just need to practice the factoring skill. Okay, so those things are the same, which means that when you factor that chunk out, again, I'm taking the x minus 3 and I'm physically pulling it out. What I'm left with is x plus 8. So that is that final factored form. If you go back and compare that by the shortcut, it matches up. That minus 3 is that minus 3. That positive 8 is that positive 8. So again, that shortcut works whenever the a value is 1. If the a value is not 1, then I'm afraid you can't use that shortcut.